This is Join Us in France, episode 189. Bonjour, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you want to learn about because hopefully you'll be visiting soon. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest with zero stress. Check out our upcoming tours in May 2018 on addictedtofrance.com. On today's episode, everybody freak out! There's a train strike happening in France tomorrow and also throughout the spring of 2018. Okay, don't freak out. I think I can help you take back control and have a great vacation in France all the same. I'm releasing this episode on Wednesday, March 21st, 2018, and tomorrow is going to be a big strike day, not just for the trains, but also for Air France, for teachers. It's going to be a massive one. So everyone who is a civil servant could potentially go on strike. I think it will mostly affect trains and classrooms, teachers this time. Then there are the SNCF train strikes planned in April through June 2018. So let's talk about these strikes and how they work. I'm going to share links to critical websites and resources where you'll go get current information about the strikes. They will all be listed on the episode show notes page, joinusinfrance.com/189, the number 189, and the links will also be on your podcast app. Those of you who subscribe to the weekly extra via email will also get this list in your inbox on Saturday. I'm excited to announce that Join Us in France is now available on the Amazon platform. If you have an Amazon Echo or Amazon Dot, or any device that's enabled for that system, you will now be able to listen to Join Us in France that way. For now, this only works in the US, but Canada should follow later this month, and hopefully other countries will follow soon as well. I will give you all the details in the announcements at the end of the episode. And I will use some of the magic words that trigger the machine. So if you're next to your Amazon device, it may trigger it. You have been warned. Episode, I want to tell you about train strikes in France because a long one is going to be taking place between April 3rd, 2018 and June 28th, 2018. Those are the announced dates, but I will explain that announced dates don't mean all that much in France. I'll also give you my tips as to what to do and give you the context of why this is all happening. Strikes in France don't work anything like strikes in the US, so I'm here to urge you to not base your decisions on how things work in the US because you'll get completely confused. I've wanted to dedicate an episode to this before, but it's not the most upbeat of topics. So I always just mentioned strikes as a side note. But when you come to France, you come to see France, the country, the sights, enjoy the food and all that. That's the part of the culture that everybody can see. But there's the submerged part of the iceberg, which is French culture that really makes a difference for people who live in France, and strikes are part of that. This is the hidden part that most visitors never see. But the culture of strikes that we've had in France since World War II is very real, and you need to understand how it works. I'm going to concentrate my remarks on the SNCF, or French Rail Service, today, because that's where we know there's going to be the biggest problem for the next few months. But the same could be said about any other companies in France that have a lot of government employees or people who have government employee status. The strikes that most affect visitors have to do with the transportation sector, and we have a lot of companies in the transportation sector. For example, the RATP, so that's the Paris RATP, that's the Paris metro and bus system, or Air France. They go on strike on a regular basis. So you can extrapolate what I'm saying about this strike to others, because it will surely happen again. We get those strikes all the time. By the way, striking rules are different between the public sector and the private sector in France. I will concentrate on the public sector because that's the part you need to know about. If French lawyers go on strike, and they will next week, it won't affect you. So I don't need to be comprehensive. I can just keep it to the public sector strikes. So one of the things that happens is that unions have to state what day they intend to call their members to strike. That's called a Preveille de Grave. So it's an advanced notice of a strike. It's like you can strike, but there's a time and place, and you have to announce your time and place of strike for public safety and all of that good stuff. So they need to give a 5 business day notice minimum. There's a lot of arcane rules around this, but I won't go into them. That's the general rule, okay? You can see all the announced strikes on a site called cestlagreve.fr. cestlagreve.fr. Of course, I'll put it on the show notes. This list is kind of comprehensive, and if you read it too much, you'll get really scared. You'll think, oh my goodness, this place, they never work over there. And it's not quite like that, because you have to keep in mind that most announced strikes don't take place. Something is usually negotiated just before the date arrives. 5 days is enough. And sometimes they announce a strike further ahead so they have more time to negotiate. A strike is an instrument of pressure on a boss or on a politician, and they find it advantageous to start putting the pressure on earlier. That's why we usually get more than 5 days warning. But this is something that surprises Americans, because they're used to, I get up mad this morning and I go on strike today. No, it doesn't work that way in France. Also, just because a strike has been announced doesn't mean that it will happen. It won't be able to start any earlier than they announced, but it may end sooner than they announced, and it may also continue longer. That's what we call reconduire une grève. So to reconduire, how would you say that in English? To do it again. That's not a good translation, sorry. If strikers intend to continue longer, they have to do this préavis de grève again, okay? They have to tell you. So if it's going to go on longer, they will announce it on C'est la Grève. Well, they will announce it. It'll be in the papers, and cestlagreve.fr will pick it up. So what does all of that mean in practice for you? We know that this time the SNCF has announced an unusual strike. The schedule is odd, starting in April and ending late June. They're going to do 2 days of strike, 3 days of work, then back to 2 days of strike, then back to work. And that will go on over April, May, and June 2018. The exact dates are listed on journestinfrance.com/189. And why are they doing it that way? Well, because they want to give it more time for pressure and negotiations. And of course, not every train gets cancelled, even on strike days. There's a mandatory minimum service that has to take place on strike days. And some train workers don't go on strike at all and keep working. The problem is there's no way to tell which ones will run and which one will not, at least not more than 24 hours in advance. For the strike taking place tomorrow, for instance, only 4 out of 10 TGV trains will run. Only 25% of intercity trains will run. Only 30% of trains around Paris will run. That's the RER and the like, and the Transilien and all that. And 50% only of regional trains in regions outside of Paris. The metro and the buses will run. That's business as usual. But that means that this strike is going to be heavily followed. And we know these numbers because the strike is taking place tomorrow and they've had to announce the numbers. But there's no way to tell how much following the strikes will have in April or May or June, because that's too far and they haven't decided yet. The other thing that's important for you to understand is that individual workers do not have to announce whether they'll go on strike or not. A person could be on strike one day and not the next. They have the freedom to strike or not, day by day, and they don't have to tell anyone until the night before, because there can't be any pressure put on them one way or the other. That's the law in France. So in practice, it means that if you're going to put together a crew to run a train tomorrow, you'll find out slowly throughout the day today who's working tomorrow or not. And they've put in place a rule that for this strike, workers have to decide one way or the other the day before and tell their management. They don't have to tell you, they don't have to tell me, they don't have to tell the press, only their management. So SNCF says that the day before a strike day, they will try to announce by 5 p.m. what trains will run and which ones will not. Are you comfortable waiting until 5 p.m. the day before you're supposed to get on the train to know if it's going to run tomorrow? I wouldn't be, personally. That's the reason why nobody can tell you if your train in 2 months is going to run or not. The workers themselves have not decided yet. So if you're planning on taking the train in France, anytime really, but especially now, you should install the SNCF app on your phone. That's SNCF. It's an app on your phone. You can find it for Android and iPhone. And when you book your ticket, this is really important. When you book your ticket, you need to give them a valid phone number and email address. They say they will keep ticket holders informed about the status of their train tomorrow, via email and SMS. Will it work in every instance? Of course not, but this app is called SNCF. The image looks like the SNCF logo. It's pretty easy to find. You should install it, get familiar with it if you're going to be using the train in France. And it's free, by the way. When you go buy a train ticket for a train that they already know won't run, it will display as either full or unavailable. If you already bought your ticket, they will tell you as soon as they know if that train is going to run or not via email or SMS. But like I said, they probably won't tell you until the day before your train at 5 p.m. And of course, you can get reimbursed for those tickets. So the money shouldn't be the issue. I don't think they'll give you any grief giving you your money back. If you don't get notified by email or SMS, grab your ticket and enter the entire reference number on the SNCF site, and you can find out that way. I'll give you a link in the show notes to the site in English where you can check whether your train is running or not. There's also a train status page that I'll give you a link to. And in general, if your train is late by more than 30 minutes or cancelled for any reason, including a strike, obviously, you can ask for a refund. I'll also link to the page where you can ask for your refund. I only found that page in French. If I find it in English, I'll change that, but so far I haven't found it in English. There's also a free phone number you can call. It will probably be really hard to get through, but the number is 0805903635. That's a French number, of course, and I don't know if it'll work from outside of France. Another tip that's important, if you're going to plan on using the train anyway, and in general, not just this year, but in general, buy your tickets directly from the SNCF. Because if the train you're supposed to take won't run, they'll either suggest an alternative or refund your money without giving you any hassles. If you buy your train ticket through companies like Rail Europe or other travel agencies that resell French train tickets, they may make you jump through hoops before they give you a refund because of a strike. I've heard of people that had to prove that there was really a strike. How do you do that? Like, take my word for it. There was a strike. Your travel agent in America cannot issue an actual SNCF ticket. What they sell to you is a voucher that you exchange for an actual SNCF ticket. But you can't get those reimbursed at any French train station. They'll send you back to whoever sold you the ticket. So buy directly from the SNCF. The link will be in the show notes. And buying from the SNCF app also works really well. This is what I would do if I were you. If you were planning on using the train in France this spring and, up until the beginning of summer, I would keep this in mind. It's possible that the strike will be over by the time you come to France. It's also possible that it won't. There is no way to predict. It's possible the strike won't happen at all because there's pressure on the government right now to back down. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. They have backed down on one thing already. They took out the issue of retirement age from this round of changes that they want to make. But the level of uncertainty is huge. Looking back, maybe you'll say, oh, this was silly. It fizzled. It was business as usual in the end. Most strikes do fizzle and they never go off. But with a big train strike like that, I wouldn't count on it. But I don't know. Nobody knows until it's all behind us. So what you need to do, and what I would do, is take the train out of your travel plans. Go some other way. You can book a flight or buy a ticket for a regional bus. You can rent a car. You can find a ride share. But do not plan on taking the train unless you can deal with a really high level of uncertainty. I can't tell you what trains will and will not run, and neither can the SNCF because of the rules of striking in France. You will find out the day before you're scheduled to go at 5 p.m. If that sounds crazy to you, and it does to me, make different plans. Listen to the episode I did about using regional buses in France. It was episode 75. The bus is a really good option. Good bus lines to consider are FlixBus. That's a German company. They are very professional. You can install their app and see all the routes and buy tickets from their app. Ouibus is also big, but it's owned by SNCF. So that might make you a little bit nervous, but it probably shouldn't, because whereas train folks are government employees, bus drivers hired by the same company are not, so they don't strike much at all. You also have Isilines, that's spelled Isilines, Eurolines, Transbus, there's many. Look them up. There are bus lines from everywhere to everywhere in France. Also consider flying if you need to go longer distance. At this point, I would not buy from Air France, just in case. When the train folks get excited, Air France may follow. They are birds of a feather, so to speak. So you have other options for flights within France, like EasyJet, Ryanair, and others as well, I'm sure. Or you could rent a car. For info on driving in France, listen to episode 138 and also to episode 16 of the podcast. 16 was more explaining the rules of the road. 138 was more the experience. Or you could search for the word driving on the website. We've talked about it often. Another good option for you is BlaBlaCar. BLACAR. It's a ride-sharing site that lots of people love and trust, and my husband has used them. He really thought it was a good experience because he needed to go from Toulouse to Barcelona. He doesn't like to drive long distances, so he just found somebody online that was going in that direction, paid a few bucks, and it was fine. They chatted the whole time. It was very convenient. Of course, this is best if you speak some French, but they might want to practice their English too, who knows. But don't start looking for a ride share 3 months before your trip. That's too soon. Sign up on the site and then start looking a couple of weeks before you need to travel. Okay, here are a few more things you need to know about strikes in France. French strikers do not get paid for strike days. I believe that's the opposite to what it is like in America. In France, unions are not allowed to compensate workers for strike time, so it's difficult for a union to convince workers to strike for a whole month, since if they do, they won't get paid that month. The pill is easier to swallow if they strike on and off, because then at least they get a partial paycheck. That's why you have this whole strike schedule with 2 days of strike and 3 days of work, etc. Again, I'll put the schedule on the site, joinusinfrance.com/189. In France, it's also possible to strike for a few hours in the day. Bus drivers did this a few years back in Toulouse. They went on strike every morning. So there was no bus until 10 a.m., and that went on for over a month. So nobody could get to school or to work on the bus. But the bus drivers, they still worked most of the day and still got paid for the rest of their hours. So it went on for a long time. It was a huge mess for me because my daughter was in high school at the time. She didn't have a driver's license yet because she wasn't 18, and you have to be 18 to drive in France. And she always took the bus, and it was a rather long distance, the school she was going to. Well, that whole time I had to take her to school and face horrible traffic because obviously everybody had to do the same, get to school or work by car instead of the bus. So there were a lot of cars on the road. I was really fed up with the bus drivers. I swore at them. But guess what? I was really glad when they got back to work. And that's the overwhelming feeling when long strikes end. Relief. And strikers count on that to pressure the government to give them what they want. Now for a tiny bit of history. The French government was always heavily involved in industry. After World War II, it was by necessity because the country was destroyed. And moving forward, it was because of ideology. French people leaned heavily towards communism and socialism. And while we never had a communist regime per se, we had leaders who saw nothing wrong with the government owning majority shares in many companies, and some of them 100%. Some examples of that are the electric company, the phone company, the water company, the train company, the commuter trains and metros, the buses, the port authorities, shipbuilding, post office, garbage, sewers. All these jobs were government jobs or civil servant jobs for the longest time. This is on top, of course, of teachers, tax collectors, social security workers, public hospital workers, nurses, doctors that work in public hospitals. They are government employees. Still a few of them are to this day. Being employed by the government, it never paid spectacularly well, but the perks were always wonderful. And for a long time, young French people, they aspired to be hired by one of those public companies and get a government job. As time went by, the government divested itself of all those shares in those public companies because they were really expensive to run like that. So one by one, little by little, France Télécom, that was the phone company, it was sold off. And EDF, that was the electrical company, was sold off more recently. Air France was also sold to private concerns. All of them, more or less, went through this. Of course, there's some jobs where it's still government, like the sewers and garbage and people like that. They work for the city. So it's a government job, but it's not quite the same level of protection. But every time that happened, one of those companies that would be sold off to a private concern, the employees, they wanted to keep their perks. And a lot of them, they did. That was part of the negotiation, and that was part of striking a lot of the time. So new hires wouldn't get the perks. But despite that, there were always plenty of takers to invest in those companies because they were pretty good companies with good prospects for profitability. A big exception to that has been anything to do with rail. Nobody seems to be in a big hurry to take the SNCF off the hands of the government. And by rail, I mean the SNCF, the company that runs trains all over the country, and the RATP, that's the company that runs Paris Metro and Paris buses. Trains take different names in France, but they all belong to the SNCF. You'll hear about the TGV, that's the bullet train, and that category also includes Thalys, that's the train that goes east to Brussels, Amsterdam, Cologne, I don't know how to say that, Cologne, I don't know how to say that town, city name in English. Köln? Sorry, don't know. And then you also have the Eurostar that goes between Paris and London. That's part of the TGV. Then you have the TER trains. That stands for Transport Express Régional. These are trains that are run by regional governments. You also have the Transilien Île-de-France. These are the Paris regional trains. And then you have the Intercité. These are trains that run between French cities that are run by the French national government, not by the regions. And of course, you also have freight trains. So that's just a behemoth of a company that's going to be really difficult to privatize. And of course, none of the employees want to be privatized. They want to remain government employees. Bits of the train service are being privatized. Like, for instance, the folk who take care of disabled travelers, that's called Accès Plus. I'm pretty sure that they work for a separate company that contracts with SNCF. Other small services like that are getting sold off, but nobody has been able to take on the whole rail system as a whole. And I think one of the reasons why this is going on now, this strike is going on now, is that the government thinks that if they remove some of the costs of running this behemoth of a company, maybe private concerns will be more attracted to the proposition. And the trains in France are good. Train service is good in France. It's not perfect, but it's good. It's definitely better than what you get in America overall. The trouble is they strike too much. You know who never strikes in France? Boulanger, bakers. Pâtissier, pastry chefs. Restaurateurs. Hotel workers. Somehow they always work. Some of them, they don't retire until they're really, really old because they don't get any retirement perks. And that's the reality of life in France that Macron is trying to address, is that, and I agree with him, is that this has to change because the people who have these jobs that are from historically government companies, they get amazing perks. And I'll tell you the perks in a minute. Now, the right to strike is a sacred cow of French life. They will always tell you that this is not the case, but strikes are designed to inconvenience users, which will then put pressure on government to back down. At least that's what they hope. Users will get really frustrated, but since most of us were raised in France with the French culture, the hidden bit of French culture that tourists never see, well, French people, they have a lot of respect for strikers, for the rights of strikers, and it works. They often despise the politicians that don't give in to what they want. This has worked really well in France for decades, and it's losing some steam. But if you look at an opinion poll, at least 50% of French people supports the strikers. Even though it's a mess, it's a huge inconvenience for all of us. And 4.5 million French people take the train every day. Imagine what it's going to be like for them. 4.5 million people. That could topple the government, right? But if you send a reporter with a microphone and you ask most of these users, they will say, well, it makes me really mad, but it's their right to strike. The right to strike is a sacred cow of French life. French people are really attached to their own right to strike and to other people's right to strike. I know people who have never gone on strike themselves, probably because they work in a profession where there are never any strikes, and yet they support strikers 100%, even if it's a pain in the behind, and they get frustrated when it inconveniences them. It's a lot like Americans and the right to bear arms. Everybody in America gets horrified by the mass shootings whenever they happen, but when the dust settles, Americans support the right to bear arms, and nothing really changes. It is baked into the American culture. And no matter how awful the situation gets with our many strikes in France, you still have a majority of French people saying, well, it's their right and it must be upheld for the greater good or something. The strikes are baked into French culture. Okay, one important detail. If there's a picket line in France and there are cops around, the cops are not there to break up the picket line. They are there to protect the striker's right to strike and stop angry users from disrupting the strike, which is exactly the opposite to what you think is happening. As a visitor, you must stay calm and find another way to go where you want to go. Don't argue with the people on the picket line because you'll get yourself arrested. And I mention this because it actually happened to me. Well, I wasn't arrested. It ended well, but I was driving to Spain with American relatives in my car, and there was a picket line at the last toll booth between France and Spain, and that dang picket line created a 2-hour traffic jam. Of course, we had to pee and we were getting low on gas and all of that. But the picket line was only letting a few cars through, and it took so long to get through that the backup was ginormous. When we finally got to the toll booth and we drove past the strikers, my relative rolled down his window and started insulting the strikers in English, thankfully. He had been fuming in the car. I heard him the whole way, but I really didn't see that coming. He could have gotten into a fist fight with the strikers if I hadn't driven off. So the whole time, he kept saying how this would never happen in America because people have guns in their cars and they would shoot the strikers in anger. Well, that would get you to prison, I believe, in France anyway, probably in America too. So I suggest you don't do that. They have a right to strike, and the police is there to protect strikers from the angry public. Keep your mouth shut, okay? I'm not going to go into too much history, but I want to tell you why so many strikes happen. There are companies in France that have striking in their DNA, and these are companies that used to be government-owned, like I mentioned, where the workers always enjoyed a lot of job protections and perks. Never high salaries, but perks that I will list in a second. When I was growing up in France in the 70s, my peers wanted, all of them pretty much, they wanted to get a government job. That was their ambition in life, a steady government job with okay pay and great perks. I never heard any of my peers say, well, I don't really want to work for the city government or the train or because the pay is too low. I want something that pays better. No, they never even asked themselves if the pay was good enough because the perks looked really good. Thank goodness by now, my daughter's generation, most young French people don't talk like that anymore. France is becoming more of an entrepreneurial country. It's a slow but steady change. We still have a lot of 50-year-olds in charge at those companies, and they immediately go to organize a strike to protect their government jobs because that's in their mentality and they're not going to change at this point. So what's the reason for the 2018 French rail strike? In this instance, the government is not proposing to change anything for current employees of the SNCF. They are saying that they don't want to give those same privileges to new hires going forward. And that's why they're going on strike. You might ask, why do they care? It doesn't impact them. Well, the reasoning goes like this. If new hires don't get grandfathered into the perks, maybe it will establish that the perks are unreasonable to begin with, and then the sky will fall and life as we know it will end. I've talked to some of them. This is how they think. So what are the perks of working for the SNCF? What am I missing that I should have had? Let me list a few of the big ones. SNCF workers cannot be let go because of a dip in demand for train services. Even if the company is in the red, which it is and has been for a long time, their jobs are safe. Nobody takes a specific train line anymore and it should really be closed and whatever, but that takes years to do. Well, nobody's getting let go. The workers will be asked to go work in another train station or different train line, but in that case, commuting time is counted as work time, and they cannot be asked to move closer to another train station either. They get automatic raises each year and automatic career advancement, so long as the worker participates in training. And of course, training is free and counts as work hours. So they get an automatic raise of 2.4% each year, even if the company is in the red. And I think most of us would like that because sometimes we get bigger raises, but sometimes some years we don't get a raise at all. So retirement age for SNCF workers is 52 if your job involves working on the train, and 57 for everybody else. That's 10 years earlier than most French people. And here's the clincher. Your retirement benefits are calculated based on your last 6 months of compensation, when necessarily you earn the most because, automatic advancement and raises and all that. For all the other French workers, they calculate the amount of your pension based on your highest earning 25 years. You get the average of that. But train workers, no, they get the highest salary they ever got. So they get much bigger retirement checks. Train folks get even better healthcare than the rest of French people. And when they go see a doctor or specialist, they don't have any copays. Now, regular French people, we have copays and we get them the money back. But still, they don't have to advance anything at all. And they get free train travel for life, even in retirement, for themselves, for their spouse, and for their children. Should our President Macron, get his way, the SNCF, the new hires, would not be offered most of those perks. Current hires wouldn't see any changes, mind you, just the new people. And they'd probably still travel for free because that's not a big cost. But the automatic raises, the promotions, and never letting go, that would stop. Macron has already made one huge concession even before the strike started. He won't modify retirement perks right now. That will calm a few people, and it indicates that they are talking already. Will it be enough to stop the strike from proceeding? Your guess is as good as mine. But my guess says no. It won't stop the strike, at least not most of it. One day of strike costs the SNCF about 20 million euros. That's because some trains are replaced by buses. The travelers who are stranded between transfers late at night, they have to be given hotel rooms, free hotel rooms. The tickets have to be refunded, and of course, there's a loss of revenue. They've announced 36 days of strike for this round already, so that's going to be a huge amount of money. And especially for a country where the average cost of operation is 30% higher than in neighboring countries. So mile per mile, the French rail system costs 30% more than, say, the German or the Spanish rail system. Yes, all those perks are expensive. And then, of course, there's the human impact. 4.5 million French people take the train every day. They are heavily impacted, as will visitors. One of the commenters on the Facebook group was saying this will give tourism a bad eye, tourism in France a bad eye. It might, but there are strikes every year and visitors keep coming back. So it's a huge inconvenience, but users forget and move on. Having said all of that, the number of strike days in France is going down overall. Younger people are seeing the unfairness of the system where the same people get all the protections, and slowly but surely strikes are getting less support. But it will be another decade or two before the majority of French people go against the strikers because it's that deeply ingrained in our culture. But if you get stuck in a strike in 2018, you don't care about the trends. For you, it's 100% pain in the behind. That's why I say, don't take the train this spring. Maybe it'll all work out and the strike will not go off, but you don't know that. I don't know that. The SNCF doesn't know that, so make other plans. And listen to episode 75 about bus transportation in France. There are lots of good options mentioned in that episode. So in conclusion, Macron makes no bones about it. He's told train workers that the country can't afford to continue guaranteeing new hires all of these perks when most French workers, including farmers, bakers, small business owners, and independent workers, are lucky if they save enough money to ever retire. So this situation is one of the sacred cows of French life. Certain workers get sweet benefits while others get nothing at all. And this is really hard to get these people who get all the perks to admit to that. They will always prevaricate and say, oh, well, it's not as bad as all that, blah, 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 blah. Well, but the truth is they get all the perks and the rest don't. The reaction from the SNCF was predictable. They'll be going on strike, possibly over and over again. But let me tell you what, folks. SNCF, RATP, and Air France have gone on strike every year around May and June. Every year for the last 20 years. So nobody is surprised. If it weren't for this plan that Macron has put forward, they would have found some other reason, as they have predictably every year for as long as anybody can remember. So call me Nostradamus. I'm here to predict that SNCF, RATP, and Air France will go on strike again around May and June 2019, and also May and June 2020, because that's what they do. I'll tell you when they never ever go on strike. That's mid-July to late August. Miracle! Well, that's because it's their vacation time and nobody strikes when they should be on vacation. I'm not being cynical. That's really how it works. So my advice to you is this. Don't give yourself an ulcer over this. Make alternative plans. Avoid the trains completely and go with a car rental or a regional bus or a plane or even a ride share. And if you're in Paris and there's an RER strike, look at bus options. If there's a metro strike, look at bus options. Install the RATP app on your phone and you will see all of these options in real time. And of course, there's always Uber. For tips on how to use Uber in Paris, listen to episode 151. I think what gets people is the uncertainty of this whole situation. Americans want answers and they want them now. Well, that's not how it works in France. We're used to living with some level of wait and see, not just when it comes to strikes, but when it comes to a lot of other things as well. French people can navigate through the strike like nobody's business because they've done it 100 times. So they're not going to panic and go to blah, blah car or train or an airplane or whatever. They'll just figure out the system, because they always do. But for you, this would be your first time dealing with a French strike. So unless you're training to become a French person, I recommend that you avoid the whole thing and plan on taking some other mode of transportation while this massive train strike is taking place. Thank you, Jeff Miller and Danielle Pham, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And thank you, Barbara Livieri, for editing your pledge up. My thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you for giving back. To support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/join us. Patreon. Join us. No spaces or dashes. You guys rock. Thank you. So like I said at the beginning of the show, Join Us in France now has its own skill for Amazon devices. Move away from your Amazon device. I will set it off now. Join Us in France is one of the first podcasts to get this. So I'm really, really excited about it. So this is how it works. First, you have to enable the podcast on your device by saying, Alexa, enable Join Us in France. Then to play an episode, you say, Alexa, play Join Us in France. Once it's playing, you can say, Alexa, tell Join Us in France to skip back 5 episodes. Or you could also say, go back 5 episodes. That's the great thing about it. It's not super particular. It gets used to how you talk to it. Or maybe you'll want to say, Alexa, tell Join Us in France to play the newest episode. Or maybe you'd say, Alexa, tell Join Us in France to play episode 16. You can also skip around within an episode. If I said some mysterious French word that you want to hear again, while it's playing, say, Alexa, tell Join Us in France to rewind 5 seconds. Or you could also say, go back 5 seconds. If you want to pause, say, Alexa, stop. And when you want to listen again, say, Alexa, resume. It's really exciting. With this device, you don't have to touch any buttons. You can control everything with your voice. It's perfect for when you're making dinner or your hands are busy or... I'm not sure how I feel about you bossing me around like that. But I think you'll enjoy it. It's that easy. You can also enable Join Us in France from the Alexa app or the Alexa website if you prefer that, but you can do it just using your voice. And as you know, Amazon is a company that cares a lot about ratings and reviews. I would love if you would write a review on Amazon for Join Us in France. I have no idea how you do that because I can't do it myself. But one of you smart folks will figure it out and tell me how, please. Join Us in France is also available on iTunes, Google Play Store, Spotify, YouTube, but adding the show to the Amazon platform will make it easier than ever to listen to the show, especially for people who are not in the habit of listening to podcasts on their phone, but they enjoy listening to audio programs around the house. So if you know someone who loves France and enjoys their Amazon device, tell them they can listen to Join Us in France, enable it for them, show them how it's done. All they have to do is ask to hear the podcast. I'll be mentioning this for the next few episodes, and I'll also send out these instructions to the email list, but I'm counting on you to spread the word. Join Us in France is on Alexa at last. And the weather is playing a nasty trick on French people. The first day of spring, it got so cold it almost froze my newly bought plants that I hadn't put in the ground yet. That's not how it's supposed to work. We want spring, and we want warm, and we want it now, and we'll probably go on strike about it. The best way to connect with me is via email, annie@journeyssinfrance.com, or if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, leave a message on 1-801-806-1015. You can also join the awesome Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, where lots of knowledgeable folks hang out and exchange France trip advice. Au revoir. Have a great week of trip planning. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2017 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.